Hi. Now I have all your attention. Good evening, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. For those of you that haven't had a chance to meet and befriend, my name is Ben Spagan. I'm Vice President here at the JES. So excited to have you with us here tonight. First, a show of hands. How many were with us last night? That's awesome. Give yourself a high five. Your hand's already in the air. That's like easy to do, right? So I'm so excited that you've come back. I'm excited because I said it last night, and so many of you heard me say this. I'll say it shorter tonight. We were just so encouraged to see the success of the idea of a week in residency with scholars, being able to bring in some of the best and brightest and have them dive in. That came from listening to you all and others suggesting that's something we should add to our portfolio of programming. We were so honored to be able to do that last year, taking our maiden voyage, our inaugural week in residency with Dr. Robert Garland, who is no stranger to the JES, as we had him here for Global Summit 2023. And we heard after his first residency, bring him back. And last night we heard the same thing. Great news for you. He was already here for Tuesday, so we brought him back immediately. So we're so glad to have you all back with us as well. Here is a critical note that I want to make tonight. We'll do our best to get the word out. It's all on me. You can blame me, and you can take the first crack at me on your way out. In the brochure, it erroneously says that tomorrow's program is at noon. That is incorrect. It is 7 p.m. It is another evening program. So tomorrow at 7 p.m., we will be here. We will also be here on Thursday at 7 p.m. Those were 4 evenings in a row, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And if I'm checking my calendar right, Friday follows that. That is our nooner. That's going to be our lunch. Come back for that. That's the end of the residency for this year. What are we doing here? We're taking a look at history, and we're taking a look at particular days and how they've really influenced and affected the course of humanity. And of course, it begs the question, what if? What if those days had not happened the way they had happened? What is the significance of their impact? And tonight we'll get a chance to take a look at a really interesting day, a phrase that we still use commonly now, the Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March. We're going to learn much more about that. Before we dive in, friendly reminder, join me if you don't mind taking out your mobile devices, placing them in silent or airplane mode, or turning them off out of courtesy for tonight's presenter. Friendly reminder, and in fact somebody already has, as I see our president coming up to help out as well. We are always happy to help you to ensure that you are having the best experience possible. I think right now there's a challenge with the headphones for those using them. We promise that we're going to do our best to make sure that we can get those fixed for you to ensure that you have the best experience possible. If you're experiencing a challenge beyond the headphones, something else, do find one of our team members, including the two of us. We always want to make sure you're having a great experience here. So let us know how we can help you enjoy this and have a better learning opportunity. A friendly reminder, too, that we're going to be taking questions at the end. Emphasis on questions, not lengthy statements and lectures of your own. If you'd like to offer a lecture, come see me. I book the programming. I'm the guy that mistakenly wrote that it's noon tomorrow when it's really 7 p.m. I promise to try not to do that to you, but I'm the guy that books it. If you have something to say, come see me. But if you have a question to ask, to pick the brilliant mind of Dr. Robert Garland, that's the time to do it. Just raise your hand. One of our team members will come around to the microphone. Please wait for the microphone so that we all can hear you. We'll get through as many of those as we can before we conclude the event. Last night, I forgot. I'm full of mistakes. I'm sorry. I forgot to mention during this portion, I mentioned it at the end, and many of you did stick around. If you didn't stick around last night for the book sale and signing, we do have copies of Dr. Garland's latest book available. So do see us in the front. That's a big thanks to our good pals at Warner Books who help us out with that. So he will sign your copy. We will sell that to you. It is a terrific book, one that I can't recommend enough. Again, it is my honor and privilege to be up here to welcome a mind that I just appreciate the opportunity to learn from again and again, 5 times in a row this week with you. Please join me in issuing a warm JES and Erie, Pennsylvania welcome to Dr. Robert Garland.
Thank you very much, Ben, and it's lovely to see so many people back from yesterday and also people who weren't. Lovely is a word I like to use. It's sort of an English word, but it means something very positive. So, not so positive is what I'm going to be talking about tonight, which is the Ides of March. Please don't ask me what Ides mean, other than that it is a way of dividing the month into three parts. The calends, which is the first day of the month, then the ninth, then the Ides, which is the 7th or the 9th. The 13th or the 15th, with the nones in the middle. But what those words really mean is anybody's guess. But anyway, the Ides of March is infamous, and that is the day, of course, when Julius Caesar was assassinated, and as Ben mentioned, beware, the Ides of March has entered into popular speech, so to speak. So, off we go. Oh, we don't go. What's wrong with this? It's not actually working. Is there another? Maybe it's this thing, is it? Oh. Tap this one here?
Yes, that'll keep
the end one. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so there's the Roman Empire the year before Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, 15th of March. And that red bit, which you probably know where that is, it's actually not only France, but it's also Belgium, it's the Netherlands, it's Luxembourg, and it's Switzerland. And that was the region, Gallia, which Julius Caesar conquered. So the other bits on that map, all the green and the strip that's Italy, of course, there, that was the Roman Empire prior to what Julius Caesar did in expanding it. So he added enormously to the size and resources of the Roman Empire. And he did so during his proconsulship. A proconsul is somebody who is appointed after they've had the position of consul in the Roman state. As you know, I'm sure, there were 2 consuls appointed every year, and 2 so that they could, in a way, check the other. Roman society, Roman Republic, was very much concerned that there should not be untrammeled power in the hands of anybody. And after you had served as consul, you became a proconsul, and you went off and you governed a provincia. And a provincia is obviously our word province. And it could be pacified, but because Rome was a military society and men were ambitious who were appointed as politicians, they wanted to be successful as generals as well. So they hoped to be appointed to a provincia that was not yet pacified. And that was certainly the case with Gallia, Gaul, where Caesar was sent in 58 BC. And he stayed there for 8 years. And in the course of those 8 years, he did untold damage to the Gallic people. It's estimated that he may have killed as many as 1 million people. And he was ruthless, there's no doubt about it. The Roman Empire was ruthless, no doubt about that either. But once it was pacified, it was accepted into the Roman Empire, and peace did reign. And in fact, Julius Caesar rewarded many of the Gauls who had supported him by appointing them to the Roman Senate. So Julius Caesar is a very controversial figure. He was very controversial in his day. And that, of course, is one of the reasons why he fell afoul of his own compatriots. So there's the Roman Empire. Now, at the end of his 8 years, he had actually exceeded his terms of office. And that meant that he was facing prosecution, which would have resulted either in exile or possibly in his death. So, what did he do? He decided that he was not going to submit himself to the Senate, and he was going to challenge the Senate, even though he offered, to begin with, a placatory sign that he would make some kind of peace with the Senate if they would promise that they would not prosecute him. They did not do so. So, what was the responsibility of the civil war? Was it laid at the door of the Senate, or was it laid at the door of Caesar? One might compare that with Trump facing felony charges. If he had not been elected president, what would he be doing at this precise moment? The mind boggles. Anyway, the Rubicon is a little river in the north of Italy, and it was the rule of law that no general could enter Italy south of the river Rubicon at the head of his army for obvious reasons, because if he did so, he would represent a threat to the Senate. And that was not something that the Senate wanted for obvious reasons. And this is where Julius Caesar issued the famous words, alea est iacta, the die is cast, meaning I'm going to see what happens. I'm handing myself over to fortune. And he crossed the Rubicon, and almost all his legates, his senior officers, followed, and so did his legions. And I should explain that at this point, Roman legions were very much attached to their generals. They served the Roman state, of course, in theory, but after a period of years, such as Caesar had with them in Gaul, 8 years, as I mentioned, they were his private army, very much. And not just because of their ties of allegiance, but because as well, it was expected that a general at the end of his time of office with them, when his veterans were retiring, that he would find suitable land and farms and other emoluments for them so that they would profit from the time that they had spent with him. And that was one of the weaknesses of the late Roman Republic, because armies were becoming more and more attached to their generals. And though they were, obviously, as I say, serving in theory the state, in practice they became private armies. So Caesar crosses the Rubicon. And this was something that another gentleman did, Mussolini, in 1922. And Mussolini wanted to sort of fashion himself on Julius Caesar. And so on October the 25th, when he was seeking to wrest power for himself and be supreme leader in Italy, he marched at the head of his army from Milan to Rome. Well, no, he didn't. His army marched from Milan to Rome. He took the night sleeper and had a very comfortable night, attended to by various nice people on the train, arriving there just in time to pronounce that he wanted simply to become supreme leader and wasn't going to give any trouble to anybody. And he compelled Emmanuel II, the king, to allow him to be precisely that. And on the left there, you see him raising his arm in a fascist salute, sort of aping himself on that statue there of Julius Caesar, and down below there, giving one of his, no doubt, rousing speeches. What the Civil War came down to in the end was a face-off between the two most powerful men in their day, that is to say, Gaius Julius Caesar and Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus. I always think that that statue makes him look as if he's on drugs or something. He looks kind of, to me, out of it. But that should not deceive us from realizing that he was also a very successful general, and certainly the most successful general of his day. He was actually almost a generation older than Caesar. The two of them had initially formed an amicitia That is to say, a professional friendship, and Pompey had married Caesar's daughter Julia in order to cement that alliance. And it had been a very loving relationship, we're told. And when Julia died in childbirth, Pompey was heartbroken, just as Caesar was. But it was also the breakdown of their amicitia, their professional alliance. And from then on, it was downhill all the way. So when Caesar announced from the river Rubicon that he was going to march on Rome unless the Senate agreed that it would not prosecute him, Pompey was the man to stand up and oppose that, and to say that he would under no circumstances allow Caesar into Rome, and that if he did come, he would be prosecuted. He also said, "When I stamp my foot, all Italy will rise." And what he meant by that was, I have all Italy supporting me, so that when Caesar tries to cause some sort of upset, he will find that he has no support whatsoever. Pompey was completely in the wrong there, misunderstanding the strength of support that Caesar commanded. And the civil war broke out. And the civil war, when it breaks out shortly afterwards, Pompey actually retreats south from Rome and abandons Italy altogether. And the civil war that follows, it's amazing, it really encompasses almost the entirety of the Roman Empire. You see the Roman Empire there, and you see those various lines across it, indicating where battles were fought. So what always amazes me is that despite the fact that the Roman Empire was tearing itself apart from 49 to 45 BC, there was no revolt, there was no weakening of the power which Rome exerted over its empire. That tells us much, I think, about the strength of the Roman system. So Pompey, as I said, as soon as Caesar marches south, he retreats to the south of Italy, to Brundisium, and then he hops over to Greece there, and a battle is fought at Pharsalus, which is in Greece. And it is a defeat, and it is a terrible defeat. It's up there, the topmost point of that red line over there. And Caesar says, after so many have died, hoc voluerunt. This is what they wished. A memorable statement, meaning it didn't have to end this way, but Pompey happened to choose, as far as he was concerned, the wrong course of action. So Pompey is defeated, but not killed. And by that track there that red line shows, he leaves to go to Egypt, where he is assassinated. And the assassination takes place because an officer thinks that by so doing, he will earn credit with Caesar, and that he will be rewarded accordingly. But in actual fact, the very opposite is the case. And we're told, and that's that little engraving down in the right corner there, Caesar wept when he was shown the head of Pompey, his great rival. It's fascinating to try to kind of comprehend what kind of personality Caesar had, but I think this story is very likely to be true. Caesar was famed for his clementia, that is to say, his clemency, because he frequently forgave his enemies. So people who fought against him in the civil war, like Brutus, for instance, he then rewarded, so to speak, with their freedom afterwards. And he did so, I think, genuinely, because he did not bear strong hatreds towards those who fought against him. So Caesar is in Italy, where he meets Elizabeth Taylor. As you can see there, she's the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra VII, the last monarch of Egypt. By all accounts, she was not the ravishing beauty that Elizabeth Taylor was, at least to judge by the coins that were minted in her name, like the one on the right there, where she is shown to have a rather hooked nose and lots of lines under the chin and so forth. But I'm sure she was a very captivating presence. She captivated Julius Caesar, and of course she later captivated Mark Antony. So she's a very interesting woman. And that little cartoon at the bottom there is a reference to the, is it a fable? We don't know, to how she managed to smuggle herself into the place where Caesar was staying at the time, wrapped in a carpet. So this is the tradition. Whether, as I say, it's true or not is another matter. And needless to say, they had a passionate affair. In the course of which, Caesar gets called away to a place called Zila, which is in Turkey, where a king called Pharnaces, who's king of a region called the Pontus, that's to say the southern shore of the Black Sea, is revolting against Rome and has killed some Roman prisoners. So he makes his very famous march up there. He manages to accomplish that distance from Egypt up there to Zila in the course of 5 days, we're told. And having beaten Pharnaces, he declares, Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I overcame. And then he goes back to Egypt. Sorry, there we are. So the civil war continues, and one of the most important battles, last battles in it, is the Battle of Thapsus, which is fought in 46 BC, and that is fought in Tunisia, and it leads to the death of Cato the Younger. Now, the civil war was fought not for any values whatsoever. We could say that it was fought for republicanism, because Caesar was obviously attacking the rule of law, but really nobody would have believed that whatsoever. People sided up on Caesar's side or on Pompey's side, basically according to whatever they thought they would get from being attached to one or the other of these two great men. The only person of any principle who really still believed in the Republic was Cato. Cato was a philosopher, and on the day of his death, when he realized, following the Battle of Thapsus, which had led to the defeat of the Republican forces, once again, the Pompeians, because the side that Pompey represented still went on fighting, on the night beforehand, rather than allow Caesar to pardon him, which he certainly would have done, he took his own life. And it's a moving description, and it's inspired many artists to paint these various pictures of him, which I should be showing you at this point. There they are. Because what he did was, we're told, very romantic story it is, that on the night that he was going to commit suicide, he read Plato's dialogue, the Phaedo, which is all about death and what to expect in the afterlife. And once he had done so, he took out his knife and he slit his stomach, whereupon various slaves came in and tried to repair the damage, so to speak. They were unable to do so because he would not allow them to do so, and he therefore died a noble death. And as I say, that has inspired a whole set of paintings depicting that event. We now reach the time when we are in the last few months of Caesar's life, and in 46 BC, he celebrates a quadruple triumph, and he does so in which he has one of his celebrated captives, who is Vercingetorix, and he has kept this man in prison for 6 years, and he leads him in the triumph and then has him killed immediately afterwards. And he does so by having him garroted, that is to say, by a piece of wire being gradually tightened around the victim's neck. And this triumph causes a great deal of offense, because one of the events is one of the 4 triumphs is the African triumph, and that was the one that had led to the defeat at the Battle of Thapsus. So Caesar was in effect triumphing over his own fellow countrymen. And we might say that this was the beginning of the end for Caesar. It's the beginning of a sense that this man was stepping beyond the law and was proving to be perhaps an enemy that had to be controlled, if not taken down. The central slide there shows the procession, the way that the triumph would have been, the triumphal procession would have gone from outside the gate at the north, and then it would have circled around the Palatine Hill and entered the Forum, ending up on the Capitoline Hill, which was where the great temple of Capitoline Jupiter was, and also close to where the Mamertine prison was, where Vercingetorix, the Gallic chief, would have been murdered. So, in the next couple of months, Caesar is elected Dictator Perpetuo, and that means, of course, perpetual dictator. So he is now, in effect, without any check on his power, even though he continues to consult the Senate, but it is abundantly clear that he has no time for the Senate, no respect for them whatsoever, and is minded to go his own way completely. And that coin there shows the words on the left there, Dictator Perpetuo Caesar, and you can see there that he's an old man. Well, he's aging, let's say. He's not that old. He's in his 50s. We don't actually know the exact year that he was born, somewhere around 100 BC, maybe a little bit earlier than that, 102, 103 BC. So he's in his mid to late 50s at this time, but he's led a very hard life. He must have all kinds of bumps and bruises and cuts and lacerations all over his body. And we also know that he was suffering from what was probably epilepsy. Epilepsy was a disease that was called by the Romans morbus comitalis. That is to say, the disease that is associated with public meetings. Because if anybody had an epileptic fit, there could be no public business discussed, whether in the Senate or in any other public forum. So it was a disease that was not understood but was feared, but it also made Caesar into somebody who was rather special. But it's not unlikely that at the end of his life, when we've now reached the last 3 months, that he was in fact physically beginning to go downhill very rapidly. We're now within a month of his death, the 15th of February, the Lupercalia festival. This was an interesting festival that was associated with fertility, and young men used to circle around the hill, the Palatine Hill, surrounded by women who wanted to become pregnant, and they would be whipped, and this would somehow cause the girls to think that that would make them more fertile. And one of the priests leading this ritual was Mark Antony. Mark Antony was a consul, and at the end of the festival, he presents Caesar with a crown, as if he is calling for him to be appointed rex. Now, the Romans had a visceral hatred of kingship. They had had 7 kings before they had appointed the republic. in 510 BC, and once they got rid of their kings, they wanted nothing further whatsoever to do with them. So no King's Day would have been something the Romans would have understood completely. And when Mark Antony presented the crown to Caesar, he rejected it, and the crowd clapped and clapped again. Mark Antony presented it again, and the crowd clapped more and more because he declined it a second time. And then he ordered it to be placed in the temple of Capitoline Zeus as Jupiter. So the question arises, was this a failed coronation attempt? That really Mark Antony wanted to have Caesar crowned king? Did he apprise Caesar beforehand? Did Caesar know this was going to happen? Or was it a way to show to the public that Caesar had no such aims of becoming a king? We have no idea what the truth might be behind all those possible options. So, round about that date, that's to say, the 15th of March, a conspiracy is formed among the senators to assassinate Caesar. And we're told that 80 senators signed up. That's a huge number, and it is very curious that so large a number of people would have been able to keep that secret, given the fact that each of them had slaves. And what is it that a slave loves to do? Of course, to hear all the gossip that they can. And I think it's extremely likely that Julius Caesar would have kept spies in the houses of men whom he suspected. And Caesar was no fool. He knew that he was a marked man. But he chose either to ignore the evidence that was put before him, or indeed simply to be indifferent to it and dismiss it as hearsay. But whatever the facts, certainly the conspiracy was formed, and the two leading advocates for it were, on the left there, Marcus Brutus, and on the right, Gaius Cassius. Gaius Cassius was the mastermind. Marcus Brutus was the charismatic individual who managed to secure really most of the others who signed up for him. He was related by posterity to the Brutus who had been responsible for the ending of the kingship in 510 BC. So he had a very distinguished pedigree, and not only that, but within his family line was the tradition of resisting autocracy and any form of kingship. So we come to the Ides of March, and here we can virtually plot the day to the hour. We have very good records about this day, and indeed for this whole period. We have, for one, the letters of Cicero, and Cicero is writing day after day to his friends and recording what is going on in Rome, so that's a very valuable source. But we also have a biography we have Suetonius' biography of Caesar, we have Plutarch's biography of Caesar, and I think it's very clear that a lot of people talked about this event afterwards, because very separate accounts seem to show very considerable similarities. So, although these hours are slightly general, average, and so forth, this is how the day proceeded. The conspirators meet at Cassius's house to discuss final arrangements, and then, as they would do, they gather at the theater of Pompey, because there is a meeting of the Senate to be held that day. And it's appropriate for them that it should be in the theater of Pompey, because, of course, Pompey was Caesar's great enemy. So they will kill Caesar beneath a statue which stood inside that particular place. At this moment, by the way, there was no official Senate house, because the Senate house in the Forum had been burned about 10 or 15 years previously, and it had not yet been rebuilt. so the Senate would move around from place to place. And it just so happened that on the 15th of March, the Senate was going to meet in the theater of Pompey. And 7 o'clock, they're all there waiting at dawn, and the great man has not arrived. And they wait, and they wait, and they wait. And eventually, they decide that they can't wait any longer. There must be something up. They're afraid. Has Caesar found something out about the plot? And so they send Decimus Brutus around to see what's going on to Caesar's house, which was in the Roman Forum, by the way. Decimus Brutus was one of Caesar's, not to be confused with Marcus Brutus, different man altogether, but Decimus Brutus was one of Caesar's closest friends. And in fact, the very night before, on the 14th of March, they had been at dinner together at the house of Marcus Lepidus, who was Caesar's master of horses. And Caesar had been preoccupied, we're told, that night. He'd been signing official papers and so on and so forth. And the conversation had gone to, what is the best way to die? And Caesar, who had been playing no part in the conversation, immediately looked up and said, unexpectedly. So, seems prophetic. So Decimus Brutus arrives, and Caesar is still not prepared to go to the Senate, and he says, why? And Caesar says, well, I'm not feeling too well. And besides that, Calpurnia has had bad dreams. Now, here this might be something that is being put into the tradition. We can't be absolutely certain. It sounds a little bit too good to be true, so to speak, because it adds to the sort of the drama of the event. But according to the sort of record, at any rate, when Decimus arrives, he is put off by Calpurnia, the wife of Caesar, who is stating, no, my husband should not go, just tell him he can't go to the Senate. And Caesar replies, don't tell him I can't go, just tell them that I won't go. Very typically a remark by Caesar. But Decimus says to him, how can you do this? This is a very important meeting. And after all, you're going to be departing for Parthia, which was true, in 10 days' time. This is the last meeting of the Senate. You are absolutely needed. And so Caesar agrees. So his house is in the Senate there, close to the Regia, that building that is on the Via Sacra, as it's marked there. And he's going to pass in this direction around the Capitoline Hill and end up in the theater of Pompey, or the buildings attached to it, particularly the building there that's marked as Pompey's Hall. So it would have taken him probably about an hour to get there, because there would have been all kinds of people petitioning and wanting to catch a sight of him and so forth. He probably traveled in a litter, which is to say, you know, a sedan chair that his slaves would have carried. He would have been preceded by his lictors. Lictors are men that carry the bundles of rods and axes that precede a magistrate. The more fasces, the more important the magistrate. And of course, Caesar would have had a great number of lictors, therefore, because he was so distinguished. So he would have made his way slowly around the Capitoline Hill to Pompey's Hall there, where obviously the conspirators, and indeed all those senators who were not in on the conspiracy, were eagerly awaiting him. By the way, that slide on the right is what the Senate looks like, sorry, the Forum, close to where Caesar lived, is like today. So he comes to the theater of Pompey, and he enters at the far end there. That's where the Senate is going to take place. And it so happens that there is some celebration going on in the theater there, so that this would have been a distraction as well for what was going to take place inside the Senate that day. Now, we don't obviously have any films, any photographs of this event, sadly, but it has, like the death of Cato, it's attracted a lot of attention by artists, as in this case. And there you see the looming statue of Pompey, and Caesar was stabbed. Beneath that statue, he was stabbed 23 times. So it must have been an absolutely agonizing death. And we're told only the second of those wounds was fatal. So quite probably his death was protracted. And the senators who stabbed them, they would have concealed their knives inside their senatorial togas, which would have been very easy to do, of course. You know, there's no security check as you go into the Senate House. And so it was an easy thing to achieve. And they were slipping on their own blood, stabbing one another. It was a completely amateurish assassination, in other words. And by the way, we know that it was 23 wounds, and we know that only one was fatal because an autopsy was performed. The first autopsy in history by a medical doctor called Antistius. I think that's very interesting. Why would an autopsy be performed? I think the reason was so that those who were opposed to the assassination could demonstrate what a cruel death they had perpetrated on Caesar. That's from the HBO series Rome, which is really very good if you haven't seen it. Came out a few years ago. And this is from the Joseph E. Mankiewicz film, which is also absolutely great. It was released in 1953, and there is Caesar clutching the shoulder of Brutus. He didn't actually say et tu, Brute. Those are the words that William Shakespeare gives him, but they do not appear in any ancient source whatsoever. What we do have is him saying words in Greek, kai su teknon, and you, my son. And why would he say that? And why would he speak in Greek? Well, firstly, people who were educated used Greek to speak to one another in a very kind of intimate way, as a way of kind of showing off, but also as a way of exclusion, to show that they were of the same social class, etc., etc. And the reference to teknon, child, may have been because there was a rumor that Caesar was, in fact, the father of Marcus Brutus through a woman called Servilia. We don't know that for certain, of course, but it's very likely because Caesar had had a very high-profile affair with Servilia when he was an up-and-coming politician, and he'd bought her a spectacular ring at a time when he was flat broke as a sign of his affection. So there was clearly something very significant in his relationship with Servilia, and it may well be that here he is being killed, partly at least, by his son Brutus, what Shakespeare calls the unkindest cut of all. So here's the crime scene today with one of the police officers looking over it on the left there. It's only been in the last few years that it's been possible to visit Lago Argentina, which is where the theater of Pompey is, but you can now visit it in Rome, and identify pretty closely the very spot where Caesar would have fallen. I mean, it's sort of identified there, obviously, by that red circle. What is interesting is that